Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military with Samurai channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 24th of November of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first let's talk about Crimea. First of all, let's take a look at this post. According to information we have, the Ukrainians during the previous night from the 23rd to 24th of November made another attempt to attack Crimea with significant number of drones of plane types. As a result of Russian air defense, all of them were shot down. Some of them were shot down above the territory of Crimea, some of them were shot down on the shore, but we understand that that was just the first attack, first wave. The Ukrainians probably were trying to discover and to find out the Russian positions, the Russian air defense positions, and as I understand, the upcoming night we need to expect for more strikes from the Ukrainian side. And obviously, when talking about Crimea, the main target of the Ukrainians is to destroy MiG-31, because currently this aircraft is the most difficult and painful headache during the special military operation for different reasons. First of all, the Russians are using MiG-39 as the Kinzhal carriers, and the Ukrainians understand that winter has come and the Russians have concentrated around 900 missiles, and obviously the Russians during the upcoming winter are going to use Kinzhal for many times. So that's why they need to destroy this MiG-31. Furthermore, the Ukrainians are saying that every time when MiG-39 can be in the sky for around 3 hours, and if you use air, let's say to use to fuel the MiG-39 in the air, then this type of aircraft can stay in the sky for 6 hours. And during this period of time, the Ukrainians are forced to use, let's say, an alarm all over the entire Ukraine, because at any moment the Russian MiG-31 can strike the Ukrainian positions. And obviously this caused significant damage to the Ukrainian economy. The sources are saying that the damage can be calculated around millions of dollars every day. Imagine yourself, just because of Russia fly above the territory of Crimea with MiG-31, the Ukrainians are losing millions of dollars every month, and the Russians don't need even to strike. So that's why this is the primary target for the Ukrainians, to destroy the Russian MiG-31, to destroy the airfields and so on. When talking about airplanes, about other reports, the Russians have created and complete the production of a new batch of fourth generation Su-35. If you remember, yesterday we just discussed that the Russians completed and built another batch of fourth generation aircraft Su-34, and now we have update about Su-35, and also the Russians promised to complete the production of another new batch of the fifth generation Su-57 fighter jets. So obviously the Russians improving their air forces, and we're gonna see if the special military operation is going to continue next year. Obviously we're gonna see more strikes and complete Russian superiority over the territory of Ukraine, and complete absence of any response from the Ukrainian side, and obviously F-16s are not able to change the situation, maybe just in the western part of Ukraine as an air defense system, nothing more. When talking about other updates from Crimea, very interesting piece of news we got from the discussions, from the negotiations between Russia and China. According to information we have, the Russians are trying to sign a contract with China company to build underground, let's say, a tunnel below the surface of the Black Sea that can connect Crimea with the Russian mainland. This is a very interesting piece of news, because when talking about peacetime, when there are no clashes on the ground, there is no war, and it's a peacetime, of course the Russians don't need this underwater tunnel. But when talking, this tunnel is needed just during the war or something like this. So that's why this piece of news tells us that probably the Russians do have plans to continue special military operation the next year, and not maybe even 2025, but also in 2026. Obviously the Russians are preparing themselves for a very long war in the territory of Ukraine, with the purpose maybe even to establish control over the entire territory of this country. And now we are moving to Kiev, because we got also lots of updates, global updates about Ukraine. As we discussed, the Russians have already calculated around, concentrated and created around 900 missiles. Another interesting information we have from the ex-deputy of Ministry of Defense, Anna Malyar. She told us that the Russians, according to her information, haven't started any offensive operation yet. Currently, the Russians are trying to exhaust the Ukrainian forces along the entire combat line, because if you remember, the latest military aid from the States were around $100 million. So obviously it's nothing. And Germany also provided some help in $1.4 billion, but Germany supported and promised to send some air defense systems. So obviously this is not let's say, equipment for offensive operation and so on. And the sources are saying that Germany and the United States of America have a secret plan. And the second plan is not to give the Ukrainians any more weapon for any offensive operation. So on the West, nobody talks about the returns of the territory in the eastern part of Ukraine, Donbass, Zaporozhye, and so on. But the Western countries try to give the Ukrainians the weapon, not even to hold the Russian on the same line, because obviously it's highly unlikely, no matter the level of support, highly unlikely the Ukrainians are able to stop the Russians on the current line. Obviously, the Russians will attack and they will get more cities and get more villages and so on. The main purpose of the Western countries currently is to give the Ukrainians such the number of weapons and this number of weapons should be enough to slow down the Russians as much as possible. What does it mean, slow down? Western countries are okay with the situation when the Russians are able to capture, let's say, 1 or 2 cities per year. So obviously this is going to be a critical situation for the Russians, because if the Russians are going to take control over Avdiivka and Bakhmut during a year, obviously it's nothing. Obviously this is not going to change the entire situation. Obviously this operation, this special military operation, the Russians with this speed will be able to get Lvov maybe in 2045 or something like this. And this is the current main goal of the Western countries, not to give weapon to restore control of entire Ukraine, but to give as much as needed weapon to slow down the Russians and to decrease their speed to 1 or 2 cities like Bakhmut and Avdiivka per year. So this is the main plan, and this situation will force either Zelensky to start negotiation process, because he understands this is also not a very good situation for Ukraine, or it will play in favor of Western countries and the Russians will be always in this conflict. So we'll see what is going to be next. When talking about other updates, of course, the most important update is the pieces of news that are coming from the Netherlands. And according to information we have, there was parliament elections, and as a result of those elections, the victory of the pro-Russian party in the Netherlands threatens to deal the Western Fighter Alliance. And currently we have European Union, and currently we have at least 3 countries that either neutral to Russia or support Russia. Of course, we're talking about Hungary, about Slovakia, and now Netherlands become a part of this small club in European Union. Obviously, this is a very bad piece of news for the Ukrainians, because one more time, Netherlands was the country who was promising the Ukrainians to send significant number of F-16s, and probably now there are very high chances that not every single F-16 that was promised will be sent to Ukraine. Now let's move to the situation on the ground, because we have also a lot of updates. Now let's start from Kherson direction. The Russians are saying that as a result of clashes in this area, the Ukrainians lost during the previous 24 hours 100 soldiers. Furthermore, the Russians reported that during the previous week, during the Ukrainian failed attempt to establish bridgehead on the Russian bank of the river, were captured around 39 Ukrainian soldiers. We have already discussed that piece of news, and on this video we see more bombardments and more strikes with FAB 500 and so on, and the situation in this village is very difficult. For example, let's take a look at this video. On this footage, on these scenes, you can see how the Ukrainian soldiers were moving from one building to another. And this is exactly what the Ukrainians are able to do during this phase of the clashes for Krynki. They can transfer from one building to another, and just during the night period of time. Because during the daylight, either they will be destroyed or attacked by the Russian FPV drones, or they will be discovered and bombed with FAB 500 or more. So that's why the Ukrainians can move just during the night period of time, but now the Russians start using like night vision equipment massively. And so what is the negative thing of this situation? If you remember, yesterday we discussed that the Ukrainians tried to develop their positions to the south in direction of the forest with attempt to get some positions and get some shelters in face of these trees and these tree lines, but the Russians counterattacked. The Ukrainians were defeated and were forced to step back. And when talking about Krynki, of course there are still a lot of buildings, but all these buildings are numbered. All these buildings are numbered, and sooner or later the Ukrainians will lose their possibilities to move from one building to another, because everything will be destroyed. And the main purpose of the Ukrainians before this day comes to capture forest on the south of Krynki. So that's why the Ukrainians will continue sending more and more forces on this bank of the river. The Russians will continue bombardments and the filtration process, as we discussed in the previous videos about few layers of filtrations. On this video we see another bombardment of Tyaginka using the FAB 500. Another concentration of forces were destroyed. So obviously if the Ukrainians were planning to send 400 soldiers, at least after that strike, maybe the Ukrainians were able to send, let's say, 350 soldiers, and some of them were wounded or even killed. So this is the situation about Kherson direction. Now we are moving to Zaporozhye area. We got also a lot of updates from this territory, and it's very interesting and very important to discuss the map of snow area. On this map, maybe it's very difficult to understand. I will explain to you. On this map we can see the snow area on the territory of Ukraine. And as you can see, maybe you don't see, I will explain to you that Kherson and Zaporozhye area that located under Russian control are completely the area without any snow. And the territory under Ukraine control are completely under snow. So everything that is colored with a red color, at least by the 24th of November, there are no snow, or maybe some parts on the north. And the Ukraine territory is completely under snow. So it, of course, reduced the Ukraine possibilities to make any actions, any offensive operations. Furthermore, for example, on this video, we can see snow. This area is located closer to Novodanilovka. The Russians were bombing the Ukrainian positions and so on. At some videos, we can see the territories without snow. So this is like mix, some territories with the snow, some territories without. When talking about the global scope about the Zaporozhye area, today we got the first geolocated confirmation of the usage of RBK 500 on this direction. The Ukrainians during the previous 24 hours lost 20 soldiers, so the level of losses continue being very low from the Ukrainian side, because many the Ukrainians are losing right now the armored vehicles, evacuation machines, different types of equipment, and almost no losses among the personnel. Now we are moving to the south Donetsk direction. We got some updates. The Russians published few more fresh videos of Lancet strikes, counter-artillery duels. This is the area between Gulyai-Polye and Velika Novoselovka, Vremivka tactical bridgehead. We see just the first, let's say, activization from this side, but there are no clashes on the ground. The same situation in Ugledar Novomikhailivka. So according to the Ministry of Defense, as a result of clashes on this direction, the Ukrainians lost 65 soldiers, and so there are no progress on the ground. The sides continue regrouping, or maybe preparation, or maybe either the Russians and the Ukrainians wait when the situation will be stabilized. I'm talking about weather, and then they will renew their offensives or counter-offensives in both sides. When talking about Donetsk, Avdiivka, we got a lot of very interesting updates, and probably the most important is that the Russians continue using RBK 500 cluster aviation bomb in this direction. The Ukrainians were completely unprepared to this type of weapon, and this is probably very powerful type of weapon. On this video we can see the distance and the range of this weapon. Just take a look at this scene. This is the circle of lights. This is the range of this aviation bomb, and it's very difficult to calculate. We can use just our eyes to understand, maybe to compare and so on. But my understanding, my vision, my, let's say, like raw calculations tells me that the range of the usage of this type of weapon, RBK 500, is much bigger in comparison with the usage of the cluster rounds that Western countries sent to Ukraine. Furthermore, today we got the first evidence of effectiveness of use of this type of weapon. According to the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, as a result of clashes during the previous 24 hours on Donetsk direction, the Ukrainians lost 490 soldiers. Significant level of losses, more than 1 battalion was destroyed on Donetsk direction, and I connect these losses mainly with the beginning of the usage of these cluster aviation bombs RBK 500. Very powerful weapon. Currently the Ukrainians still haven't found the solution how to reduce damage, how to hide or something like this, and obviously this situation gives the Russians significant superiority. Obviously sooner or later the Ukrainians will find the solution, but the Russians have a window of opportunity to use this situation and to improve their positions and maybe even to establish control over entire Avdiivka. Today we got some updates that the Russians continue offensive operation in direction of the residential area that located on the southeast of Ocheretina. As a result of that attack, the Russians managed to improve a little bit, just a little bit, their positions, and now we see that probably, yes, we were right when we were talking 2 weeks ago about these attacks. Obviously the Russians have a very crazy goal, and they're planning to move in this direction, and they're planning to establish control over this entire territory. And at least they're doing exactly what we're talking about. They're moving here. It's a perfect bridgehead to protect, because this territory has the defense as the railways from every side, and if the Russians are able to get there and dig in deeper, obviously, and there are lots of buildings, lots of, let's say, basements that they can use for different types of positions, and also this territory is on the hill. So this might be like a complete disaster for the Ukrainians if the Russians are able to get inside of this hill. From these positions they can cut everything from everything, and not just Avdiivka will collapse. Obviously a lot of cities, a lot of villages, a lot of positions will be collapsed automatically, and the most important, the Russians will establish fire control over the railway station logistic hub Ocheretina. The Russians published another video of Lancet strike in this area. Also we see winter, so these are fresh scenes that took place maybe even today or yesterday in the evening. As a result of Lancet strike, another Ukrainian artillery system was destroyed. When talking about southern direction, we stopped receiving any updates, just one geolocation of Russian FPV drone bombardment. Very difficult situation for the Ukrainians. Most of the sources, either the Russians and the Ukrainians, confirmed that the Ukrainians took a decision to step back. They start withdraw their positions, moving forces from this territory inside the central part of Avdiivka. During the evening and during the previous day, we still haven't received any, let's say, 100% proofs and confirmations that this pump station was abandoned by the Ukrainians. Most of the sources agreed that this territory currently in the gray zone. Neither the Russians can enter this pump station because this area, the fields in the south, are mined, and they still need to make a lot of things before they're able to enter. Neither the Ukrainians can stay there because this territory is under very heavy fire, and also the Ukrainians just want to reduce the risks if the Russians are able to penetrate the Ukrainians' defense belt on the south. Obviously the Ukrainians need to be flexible and mobile to step back as fast as possible in the central part of Avdiivka. So they're just stepping back because they want to be secured in a secured area, and they don't want to be under the risks of being encircled by the Russian forces. So this is the situation on Donetsk direction. Now we are moving further to Artyomovsk Bakhmut area. We got also a lot of updates, and the most important are coming from the line between Azaryanovka, Kurdyumovka, Andreevka, Klishchevka. There are very heavy clashes exactly among the railways, between the villages, between the ruins that left from villages like Andreevka and Kurdyumovka, Zelenopolye. There are very heavy clashes, both sides, either the Russians and the Ukrainians attack each other. On this video, for example, we see how the Russians were bombing the Ukrainian positions along the railways using artillery systems, using mortar systems, trying to deal as much as possible damage to the Ukrainians, trying to reduce their forces as much as possible. We don't know the number, but we just see about very fierce and heavy clashes. The Ukrainians, from their side, are doing the same. The Russians try to send some reinforcements or probably stormtroopers to clear the tree lines in the railways. The Ukrainians managed to discover them, to be more precise, the forces of 92nd Mechanized Brigade, and the Ukrainians start bombing the Russians with cluster rounds. Obviously, that squad was destroyed of Russian forces. So anyway, currently this is the most difficult and the most fierce area of the most fierce clashes in this direction. Furthermore, the Ukrainians launched another unexpected attack between the villages like Mayorsk and Azaryanovka, and as a result of that attack, according to the Russian sources, the Ukrainians managed to establish control over 3 Russian positions, strongholds, and they managed to concentrate up to 25 soldiers in this area. Obviously, that was something like a storm squad, storm platoon, and now the Ukrainians will continue sending more and more forces. And now we see the main plans of the Ukrainians. They try to attack between the Kurdyumovka, Zelenopolye front lines and Mayorsk to split this territory in 2 parts to establish fire control and control over support over this territory. And the same attack they're planning to make on the north of Zelenopolye, Kurdyumovka in the area of Andreevka. And now there are very heavy clashes on the northern part, and using these 2 attacks, the Ukrainians are trying to half encircle, even encircle the Russians in Kurdyumovka, Zelenopolye, and basically to force the Russians to step back from this territory. Obviously, the Russians are not going to step back because they paid a significant price for capturing these strategical points. So obviously, there are going to be the most fierce clashes on this area, and this is going to be like face-to-face combat, and nobody is going to step back. When talking about northern flank, we got updates of the beginning of some bombardments of Grigorievka, the village on the Russian side, let's say, of the canal. The Russians managed to discover the Ukrainian machines, the temporary positions, and as a result of strikes, those positions were destroyed. So maybe this is something like artillery preparation before the next waves of attacks from the Russian side in this direction. Anyway, no matter the situation in the Ukraine, on the ground, the Ukrainians have some panic, and today the Russian sources start spreading the intelligence information that they managed to discover that Ukrainians are planning in the period from 27th of November to 20th of December to make a provocation with a chemical weapon on the government chemical plant in the city by the name of Konstantinovka. This city is located very close to Bakhmut, Artyomovsk, and the Ukrainians are planning to achieve few goals as a result of this provocation, according to the intelligence service of Russian Federation. First of all, they want to make panic with the chemical weapon. The second goal is to force the world to pay attention to this area and maybe to unblock some investments in finance and military aid to Ukraine. And the third plan, obviously the Ukrainians understand that there are very high chances and there is a very big risk that the Ukrainians will be defeated on the west of Bakhmut, Artyomovsk, and they will be forced to step back. So that's why they can also use this chemical plant and chemical weapon to stop and slow down the Russians and to win some time for regrouping and to move some reserves on the line of Konstantinovka, Chasov Yar, like, let's say, to reduce the risks. Very heavy clashes and very interesting updates are coming from Bilogorovka. We will discuss more updates in the next video, but according to information we have, currently the Russians start using RBK 500 on this area as well. Most of these fortifications are located on the hill, so that's why the Ukrainians don't need to build like something that they can hide, because they're always on the hill, and at least before today it was very easy to repel every single Russian attack. But starting of today, the Russians start using the RBK 500 cluster rounds, and the Ukrainians start losing dozens, maybe even hundreds of soldiers every day. A lot. We start to see significant number of wounded soldiers from this area, with the wounds from the usage of these aviation cluster bombs. Tomorrow we will publish some geolocation. The next video we will discuss the battle for Bilogorovka in more details. Obviously, RBK 500 is going to become a game changer in this special military operation and can bring the Russians significant results. When talking about Kupiansk Liman, we haven't received anything. When talking about geolocations, just the losses. On Liman, the Ukrainians lost 100 soldiers, on Kupiansk 50 soldiers, and if you remember, we discussed about the Russian attempt to storm Sinikovka. By the evening of the 24th of November, we still haven't received any proofs of, say, Russian entrance of the village and so on. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.